Started here. Hello, everyone. Welcome. And welcome to my old friend, Erin Wilson. Erin, it's great to see you as always.
Thanks for having me, Sloane. Glad to be here, man.
Awesome. Great to have you. So, first of all, we're doing these AI webinar series specifically focused on recruiting and staffing leaders, folks in talent acquisition, both at direct employers and staffing firms. Really, because it's such a sea change. And I think our industry and the labor market more broadly is one of the areas that's going to be most impacted by this change. And I think understanding, I think importantly, how to stay ahead, adopt technology while remaining human is going to be at the crux of this transformation. And I actually think, in my experience with AI, uh, it's an opportunity to actually be more human, spend less time clicking around on dashboards and everything else, and more time really engaging, in our case, with great candidates and folks that want to identify their next career opportunity. So Erin's one of the best people in the world at doing that. And Erin, maybe you can start by giving us a little bit of an overview of your background before we jump into some of the meat of the conversation.
I'll do my best to keep it short and sweet. 18 years in, I fell in love with tech recruiting. I didn't fall into it. It's something I've been passionate about ever since. But over time, I really developed the desire to impact more people. But I'm only one person and I don't have more time. That's where technology came in. So I'd say for the last 10 years, I've been obsessed with tech-enabled recruitment, which has now become recruitment-enabled AI. And I'm sure we'll get into that soon.
Recruitment enabled AI. I love that. I love that. So let's talk about that. So one of the things we talked about in our prep call was mindset over matter. This notion that, you know, as you're adopting any technology, whether it's, job boards of 20 years ago, which had their own transformational effect, to this sort of modern agentic AI, which is, I think, going to be even a bigger trend. As a recruiter and a talent leader, what is your mindset as you enter this era?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important to break down mindset. It's actually how you approach the AI more than the tech itself. And so, personally, in my mindset, I really look at myself as a human API, or to be more technical, maybe a protocol layer or an integration layer. I'm not afraid of the technical jargon because we have to understand the technology we're working with. But I still think we're the bridge, Sloan, between the people and the technology.
And I think you mentioned this even in the context of the previous sort of ATS adoption kind of, transition. And when we went from sort of manual processes to semi-automated processes to more automated processes, how do you feel like that philosophy that you brought to, I know you did some pretty large scale like greenhouse implementations to really get people to adopt process. How does that stay the same? How does that change, with AI involved in some way in the process?
Yeah, I mean, the historical data is so fun to look at now. We're talking about maybe 10, 12 years ago when applicant tracking systems started to modernize and take off. And even then, it highlighted the mindset of the person purchasing that software, right? So if you look back to greenhouse versus lever, dun, dun, dun. Back in the day, there was a lot of debate about it. But in my eyes, it was a clear winner. It was greenhouse. The simple idea was that lever was built to help people source more.
Right.
Greenhouse was built to help companies hire better. And in fact, if you go look at the data, I'll give you guys some homework. Look at the number of IPO companies that took Greenhouse with them through the IPO versus the number of lever. The score is egregious.
Yeah. And this is the beginning of that next transition. Of course, ATS and integrating AI into it is going to be a big piece of this. But I think what I wanted to touch on again that you just mentioned is like you're this protocol layer, you're the human layer, and you're kind of working within a certain framework, whether that framework is very process driven or whether that framework's now maybe more malleable because agents can kind of react in real time, right? So when you think about this recruiter enabled AI versus AI enabled AI, let's get a little heady and philosophical. How are you thinking about those inputs and outputs over the next 3 years?
Yeah, well, I love industry context, Sloan. And if you there's a gentleman out in the market named Glenn Lindley. He's doing great things. He started a company called Talent IP, and he's collecting a lot of data for us all. If you look at his most recent poll, you'll notice that there were some highly ranked products. The reality is, though, there's no big brand winner. There's a lot of parity, and it's going to be about how we stitch or stack those technologies, how we integrate them with our workflows. So coming back to what are we actually measuring in order to be successful? I hear a lot of folks talk about sourcing more and not talking about the fact that you don't need AI to figure out if a hiring manager can interview 5 people in the next 5 business days.
Hmm.
So, what I'd love to use the AI to be doing is spend less time sourcing and more time making those interactions count. So think about it as almost a per interaction value. It is the number of conversations you need to have to get to the end goal. And so if you're using AI to continuously learn and develop, you don't calibrate over 6 weeks. You calibrate in 6 days. You don't run 6 batches. You run one, and you have 6 meaningful conversations. You can quickly calibrate with interview feedback and save everyone time. So the inputs and outputs are actually less obvious because I believe what you're looking for in the new era is what I would refer to as edge data. These are not the verdicts coming out of interviews. These are the behavioral patterns captured by the software when you're having human to human interaction.
Mm. And it frees up the human perhaps to engage more deeply in the conversation because they're not having to think about as much maybe their interview process, the notes, writing things down. So you kind of free up that part of your brain so you can really focus on the individual. And but where's the I mean, both you and I think, are leaning pretty heavily into this. Where's the rub? Like, where's the good and the bad in this? And how do you think, and from what you've seen, how are candidates and hiring managers looking at AI in the hiring process?
Well, I mean, I think that iteration is the key. And so just going back to your last point, what this allows us to all do is iterate much faster. Um, However, folks tend to iterate and solve problems when they want to. So again, one of the challenges I put out for all of us using AI is AI is not going to help you qualify a client. AI is not going to help you decide if that job is billable. AI is not going to help you um, work through those nuances to actually decide, is the time I'm using with AI worth using? And I still think that's the rub.
And I wonder, when you look at the world of recruiting, and historically you've had sort of specialized agencies, tech recruiters, contingency based, 20, 25, 30% fees. You've had, some fractional and RPO, and that industry has grown. And then, of course, you've had in-house talent teams. And we've had a major reset because I would say for most companies over the last two years, 18 months, hiring has been fairly stagnant. It's been stiff. It's been a little bit sluggish, right? Felt like there's been molasses and glue in the market. We see that changing, obviously, in AI and AI tech companies. Of course, that's sort of the leading indicator, but a lot of other places I think are fast followers, and we're starting to see things loosen up a bit. But that means that a lot of recruiters are going to be hired back into companies. Maybe companies are going to take a different approach and go with a fractional type approach because it's cheaper. And with AI, the fractional recruiting teams or the contingent recruiting teams can deliver that same value of really high touch human to human interaction, but in a much more scalable way. I mean, how do you view that changing?
Yeah, I feel like I've been in this world for years already, and there's a little bit of catch up now in the market. I mean, um, when you think about how headcounts were planned going back a few years, we'll just double year over year. That was
Yeah.
the plan, and then recruiting would just double year over year. But some of my friends, you included, Sloan, we've all thought about it differently for years now. We've thought about how many resources do we really need, and it's not about actually having less humans. It's about the opportunity you provide for each human on your team. It's about the depth of the relationship between the people and who they're recruiting for. One of the biggest complaints from larger companies is I get a new recruiter every 3 weeks. I have
Yeah.
to re-explain myself, right? So again, as a recruiting, I would love to be spending more time with the individuals I'm working with and deepening those relationships, learning from those folks, and developing culture at the company. Again, you can hire all you want, but if the culture isn't in a good place, the hires will be wasted. And we've seen that if you look back in the last 4 years, sourcing for the sake of more sourcing came crashing down in the last 3 years. And a lot of our friends in recruiting may find it challenging to find another job in recruiting, especially if they don't evolve. And I think that's what you're hinting at in a really strong way.
Well, I think the notion of like where is the value in the process, right? And it used to be in it, I think it is in certain markets, maybe finding the diamond in the rough, right? Finding that perfect candidate, quote unquote. But if in one sense, the proliferation of one-click apply on job boards and the proliferation of people moving jobs every 9, 12, 18 months, the churn in the market is much greater than it was 10 years ago, and the noise is really there. So sourcing is, yeah, sometimes people are like, well, I only feel comfortable if I get at least a couple hundred applicants for any given job, then I know I'll have gotten enough. But the reality is, you don't need 100 or 200 or 300 applicants. You need that slate of five people that the hiring manager is super excited about that are high intent. So maybe where do you think in the funnel the biggest impact both to like the recruiting profession and the hiring team is going to be? Is it that sourcing area is going to be the most kind of AI-ifiable? Or is it going to be down closer to the actual hire? Or how do you look at that?
Yeah, I'd love to say there's a lot of parts, but it probably boils down to two, top and bottom of the funnel. The top of the funnel, as a recruiter, again, instead of thinking about how I could source 400 people, how about sourcing 20 genuine personalized relationships in 30 minutes,
Yeah.
right? And then using AI to calibrate process interview feedback from there. You may only need one more batch, right? So, and I would encourage people to go that way. The bottom of the funnel, how many times have we spent weeks going back and forth with candidates and hiring managers to collect data to get the right offer out, only to find it's not the right offer? All of that can go away now. One phone call, transcription, summary, insight, and data, make the best offer the first time, and you don't have to convince the hiring manager. We spent 10 years trying to have credibility in the last mile to get the offer we needed for the candidate. And now there's less human intervention because the AI enables that data faster through the pipeline, and your partners can trust you plus data more.
It's what you said about less human intervention. I think it's like the human intervention, people I think are afraid of that going away. I don't think it's ever going to go away. The human input, let's call it, it's just going to shift from, yeah, clicking on buttons, putting stuff into different parts of a dashboard, trying to figure out where to put the correct data to get it to the right person, to get the approval to do this. And it's just going to be synthesized by, especially if it's an AI that you build, maybe it's personalized, your company's invested in this and really put the time into it. You can ask, hey, we've had five conversations. This is what the person is. This is what their background is. Let's look at some external data sources. What's the offer? Like, what's going to make this work? And I think it's important, in my view, as I talk to my customers where I'm building, custom AI for recruiters and talent leaders and recruiting agencies. Like, look, you need to focus on how you can make your humans more human and less robotic. Because a lot of recruiting, as you know, is incredibly rote, routine, and in a way robotic. And who are the top performers? The people who can literally grind through 20 phone calls, 20 phone screens a day. Grind through sending 150 LinkedIn messages. But is that really where the value to the job seeker is? Where the value to the hiring manager is? And honestly, is that really what the recruiter wants to do all day? So I do think there's some exciting things happening there, but how do we as like professionals and someone that's been inside companies and obviously doing fractional work and other things to really support the growth of this sort of next iteration of AI jobs, how do we implement this in a way that's responsible and also help shape the policy and the regulatory environment? Because right now that is not clear. How do you think that's going to evolve? How do you think, from your own experience, looking at things like bias and helping with bias training, trying to understand that at scale with some of the companies you looked at, how do you think AI is going to help and hurt that area?
I think it starts with education. Again, coming back to a lot of the risk that we induced in recruiting over the past decade came from reaching, from too much volume, too much output, not enough action against that, too much activity, not enough productivity, right? And so I think it actually starts with our counterparts. Um, isn't it funny that our job as recruiters is to find people that will last forever at a company, but I've never seen a company last forever. So if we're actually finding someone How long are they going to work at that company? How long do they need to implement that skill set at that company and drive impact? And if we start from just a smaller point of origin, if we be more reasonable about that, um, we can implement structured interviewing. We can have these high quality decisions and give everyone feedback, have an equitable approach, honestly, without a lot of AI. But maybe if the AI takes away the distraction of needing to source and
Right.
needing to collect all the notes, then we can all get in a room and just focus on what's the interview plan for today,
Yeah.
right? How many times do you ask a hiring manager, you're so serious about your job, you even wrote the job description. What's the interview plan? Huh?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's where all the risk it comes in, right? You have no plan. You're going to hire a referral. You're going to break all the rules. Slow down.
Yep. Yeah.
Because if you do it the right way, the job will get filled in 45 days. There's not a time lapse problem here. There's a focused, structured, discipline problem here. So I think AI can help with that, holding people accountable, getting data to the surface faster, and driving with data and transparency to encourage that collaboration as opposed to taking a loss, repercussions, a
Yeah.
little bit more of the old school approach.
Yeah. I think that's where I'm seeing the biggest gains, just getting data moved through the pipeline, right? Getting insights surface and not having to, because if you are doing any sort of high volume recruiting, like you said, that sourcing piece, which is from our estimate, 60 to 70% of what a sort of recruiter is doing. That's basically, and that is a lot of cycles for human beings to do all those calls, ask all those questions, have all those conversations. And if every 8, 10, 12 people you talk to, you're getting one or two submissions that get through to the interview stage, that's a lot of cycles that, I think are not necessarily valuable in that moment.
We're just not learning fast enough, right? If that's the case, we as recruiters are not learning fast enough. And what our hiring managers and our partners depend on us to do is learn as fast as possible so that they don't have to go through those cycles. They're focused on their job. That job has its own learning curve. Which AI should I be implementing in my engineering group? Should I
Right.
be using Copilot or not? They don't want to be thinking about fake resumes in recruiting. They just want to
No.
meet the best 5 to 7 people 1 to 2 weeks after they kick off the job.
That's an interesting thing you mentioned, the fake resumes. I mean, we've gone as far as to see AI agents applying to jobs like as a, hey, I'm an agent and I'll do this work, for what have you. So it's just a very interesting time. When you look at the industry, because your emphasis is on tech, right? That's sort of your expertise. You live up in the epicenter of the tech world in NorCal. What's sort of going on in the market? Like what is happening and what's your overall kind of thoughts on the next 12 or 18 months?
First of all, it's exciting. It's exciting up here. There's 1,000 AI startups that have raised $8 million and can't tell you what they're building. And as a recruiter, that's super exciting because our job is to see something before it exists, believe that it's going to have a real impact, and then go communicate that
Yeah.
to the market. Which again, I think AI can do a wonderful job at helping us communicate better, more efficiently with the market. But what I'm also seeing is something I'm excited about, but I also kind of I'm worried about with my peers in the space, mostly because I've already made some of these mistakes. But all of a sudden, a lot of my peers in recruiting are also engineers. Well, they're using AI to build things. But one of the things that kind of hurts my heart a little bit is I'll see someone work on a resume screening tool for 3 weeks. And I just find it interesting because there's already 8 out there.
Hmm.
And are you spending your whole time worrying about fake resumes? Or are you spending the whole time trying to, you know, build relationships with growing companies? So I'm a little concerned that recruiting that was born out of tech has adopted this engineering mindset, but we're building for the sake of building. Now we're kind of doing what the industry taught us over the last year instead of using all that and becoming the integration layer for all of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think the human, where where the human ends, where this sort of like AI begins, because what we're seeing and what we're doing with sort of building these custom agents is you train them like humans, right? And they take on maybe a little bit of the people training them. And so the key piece I think that you're saying and that I see a lot is, how do we as recruiters like remember and reinforce this notion that like we have to maintain a really robust human workforce. And I think there's a lot of doomsaying about jobs being eliminated because, you can now have your AI write 100 million lines of code, in an instant or what have you. What's your take on that, on the dehumanization element and the displacement of labor? Is that a conversation that's happening there in Northern California?
In spades. Salesforce just laid off a bunch of people, said it was because of AI. But I have a controversial point of view on that. I call BS. I think that these tech companies overhired for the last 10 years. They hired functions that weren't necessary. They put too many people, not enough skills development, learning and develop. They didn't develop their people enough. We've gone through a cycle of rifts. Nobody wants to go through more. So the really easier answer is we cut this department. AI replaced it. But the truth is, there's just a small team of project managers still doing the work with some AI enablement. The truth is, AI is all over the place, but it isn't replacing entire departments yet. I think again, people will, as long as people hire people, AI's got a ways to go, and we're still in that world. People want to work with people, and they want to hire people. The AI is a tool; it's not the core.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we're gonna be all, 25% unemployment and in some really dark place. I think it's going to be, however, a major shift for a lot of people. And you have to feel for the people in those teams at Salesforce that were probably doing great work, and for whatever reason, yeah, whether it's a real thing or whether it's an excuse to have the stock pop, because it shows investors they're saving money. But I think if you look at historical context, I read something that every 50 to 75 years, half of the jobs that exist cease to exist and new jobs replace them, whether that's a horse-drawn carriage being replaced with the car, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's probably going to be similar in terms of a lot of job types will rapidly transition. I just don't think it's going to take 50 to 75 years this
I
time.
totally agree with you. There's a lot of supporting data. I mean, if you look at the Fortune 50, most of them in the Fortune 50 weren't in them 20 or 30 years ago. And it speaks to what you're talking about, this rapid evolution of the employer, of the corporate environment. And if the corporate environment is where we all work and it's iterating to the point where things that are as big as Fortune 50 don't exist 20 years later, we better take note. And I remember you and I talking years back about how the recruiter was going to be the next real estate agent. The real estate agent of 2008, the recruiter of the tech industry, it was going to come. And that's what happened in the last few years. A lot of folks were making really good money, but they weren't developing skills, deep skills, right? And now they're being exposed, a lot of them. And I don't mean to call them out. I'm just saying now it's not too late. But if you don't evolve, if you don't figure out a way to differentiate yourself, it will be insurmountable in 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, it's a combination of adopting the right technology, staying current, but making sure that you are not outsourcing the core skills that recruiters need to have to the AI. Because you can't outsource the humanity, you can't outsource the human connection, you can't outsource the notion of judgment. And I do think that's a really important piece of this is where's the human judgment in the process, right? And keeping that front and center, especially for hiring, not only because, you will get better results, but because, I do think that from an overall kind of just like moralistic framework and just sort of sci-fi dystopia, like, do we all want to be like hired and fired by the AI? Probably not, right?
Probably not. Well, and there's a good example on this call. Dean is on this call. Dean is the founder of Source Owls. It's one of my favorite platforms. It doesn't really overemphasize AI or focus on the flashy bells and whistles, although they have some really neat tools for recruiters. You know what it does? It does an amazing job nudging behavioral factors that lead to completed hires.
Yep.
It just keeps people accountable. And you know what? He works harder than anyone on the platform, the founder, making sure that that discipline scales as the platform scales. He's not going to turn his back and say, AI is going to take care of it. I promise you. I promise you that. He's going to keep an eye on it. So that's the kind of stuff where I'm interested to see who's enabling recruiters. If someone's pitching us, hey, don't work anymore, go grab coffee, I'll make money for you. If it's too good to be true,
It
certainly is.
is. Yeah, and I think, some of the stuff we've been talking about and bringing some solutions to companies together is this combination of, yeah, you don't, I think you don't want to necessarily just talk about AI, AI, AI. I think that people are over that, and I think that they recognize it's like saying, "Oh, we have a mobile app." It's like at first that was cool in 2011, but in a year, everyone was like, "Well, of course you have a mobile app." That's like everyone is. That's it's where it's a mobile. Everything's mobile, and it's I think we're getting there very rapidly. It's like, of course you use AI, but like how and to what extent, and also how does the AI not just be the product, but how does the solution that you're bringing help me and my team, my company get ROI and help my recruiters be more successful? So I'm love that. Would love to. Thanks for coming, Dean, and would love to talk to you after. That sounds like a very cool product. So we have a few minutes left, and I have a few Q&As here that have popped up, Aaron, that I'm going to ask, and I think they're really
Oh,
interesting.
cool.
Um, so one of them is some employers and candidates may see AI as a black box, opaque decision making, low transparency, trust, etc. How do you see it? And do you think this is correct? And maybe how do you reframe it, so that there is this more sort of credibility around it?
Well, today I agree with the candidates because the AI is a black box. It's a derivative of the hiring process, which has been a black box for as long as we know.
Right.
What I believe is really helpful with AI is there's really not an excuse now to have a hiring process without a candidate guide, right? There's no excuse to run a candidate through a process and have what I refer to as information asymmetry, right? Where all the information rests with the hiring team and none of it rests with the candidate. We should be able to give all this up front. The best recruiters have been doing that for years. At the end of their first call, they say, hey, here's what the process looks like from this call to the time you get the offer in hand. Why can't every recruiter be doing that? They
Yeah.
can, right? And I think that's where AI can help is
Right.
getting that consistency scaled throughout your team, your org, your business.
I love that because in one hand, candidates are adopting their own AI tools like these auto appliers, right? That'll write a job description for you and apply you to 100 or 500 jobs. And of course, I don't blame them. I mean, you hear some of the numbers of how many jobs people have to apply to get a call back. So there is a lot of it's going to create a lot of noise, but I think done right with the right approach, it can also create a lot of transparency. And I think
Well,
more than anything, that's what the complaints are is ghosting, right? That's what people hate. And this maybe makes a dent in that.
I agree. Just a quick note, AI helps you apply a lot, but I have data that says if you apply to three or more job titles, your conversion rate is half as good. And every time you use AI to apply to 500 jobs, you're covering many job titles to get there.
Yo, yeah, you're basically throwing shit at the wall. And honestly, if the AI is like modifying your resume, how far is it going? Is it modifying at 5% or is
Yeah,
it modifying at
yeah,
50%? You know,
that's
and
right.
that's not going to be great when you get into the interview. So a few more questions. Um, where is the hesitation, would you say, in your conversations with other talent leaders internally or on the agency side? Where's the hesitation on AI adoption right now?
Some of it's just you know, change management, right? Starts with, oof, that's a big change. But I think some of it comes back to cost. The
Mhm.
AI tools are no different than the previous tools. They all want you to use their tool and they all need to make money. And so as recruiters think about in the past, we had an ATS and a CRM, but every one of those suppliers wanted a premium. And recruiting is not necessarily known for having the biggest budget in the building. So I see a lot of that in my peers because it's easy to try an AI tool, but once you get hooked on it, it can get really costly really fast. So that's cost is another factor. The other thing is they're just not fully developed. So what I love about the community is they're not only using the big brands. Going back to Glenn's post, they are finding and hunting and testing every single AI tool in the market faster than anyone. That's what recruiters do. They rapidly prototype, and they're doing that. But we're outpacing the AI tools in a lot of in a
Yeah.
lot of ways. They're not as dynamic as the greatest recruiters are. Really quick, the most effective sourcing method I've seen in the last year has no AI in it. You record yourself pitching and send it to the candidate. No AI. Response rates over 65% at scale. That's what I'm seeing. So
I mean,
again,
it's the same thing
it's
if
a
you're
question.
selling. if you're selling software, that's what everyone sends you. Send a quick video with the demo, 45 seconds, and people are, if they are interested and they're, you sent to the right list, you're going to get that conversion. That's actually, interestingly, you might be the first person I've heard that from that said record the job pitch. That's as always, you come up with clever ideas. So let's wrap up for everyone. We have one final question here. Um, what like if you had to give one piece of advice to, let's say people who've been in the recruiting industry, who've weathered this storm over the last 18 months, are excited about the future. We got great macro signals, in terms of, I think, interest rates coming down, some rough job numbers, but we've seen this movie before. Generally speaking, when it gets to this point, things start to come back up. The bottom doesn't last forever. I would expect that to be the case here. So I'm excited personally for the next 18 months and with my own business being that we sell to recruiters and staffing agencies, we're seeing a lot more confidence in the last 3 months than we have really in the last 18 months. So if you had to give advice to folks out there that are in our profession coming into 2026, what would it be?
The first thing has nothing to do with AI, and I would say trust your instinct. Okay. When you meet with a hiring team and they don't know what to call the job, you do. Work through it. Get candidates in front of them. Use AI to do the feedback really quick, but help them find a title.
Right.
If I, everybody could have taken three titles 5 years ago. Today, it's one title. We got to get down to it. But in terms of the AI, I encourage my peers to tinker with a point of view and a time box. You can play with any AI tool in the world you want, but you should have a really clear use case that you're using to test. And you should only do it for 48 to 72 hours and then measure your work. Come back up for air, go back to it in a few days. It's so easy to get lost in the AI cave. I've been working with it for about 2 years now, and I keep going into caves and coming out. And I hope to share this. We can actually do a lot as recruiters, but it's super easy to get caught up on one problem or one tool. And that's not ever going to help you solve the problem in the market that we're trying to solve, which is many problems more efficiently and more effectively for the company we're working with.
Awesome. Well, as always, this has been incredible to have a conversation with you, and congratulations on an amazing career. Looking forward to continuing to collaborate. Me and Erin will be bringing some cool stuff, I think, to market together over the next few weeks and months. And yeah, really excited for that and really appreciate you taking the time here today, brother. For those who are here, thank you for joining. We're doing these AI in staffing and recruiting webinars every 2 weeks. I believe we have the folks from Veti, which is a background check platform that's done some very cool stuff to accelerate the process for both job seekers and hiring managers coming up in a few weeks, and many more in the pipe. So uh, we'll keep you on the list if you RSVP here. If you have any friends who want to join, feel free to share it to them. And again, my name's Sloane Barbour. I'm the founder and CEO of Engin. Thanks so much to everyone for coming, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Thanks, Erin.
Thanks, Sloan.
Peace out, brother.